It is clearly a Muslim inflicting that torture on a Hindu. Muslim masculinity, the Muslim manhood, which I think has always been a very, very troubling and deeply, deeply troubling issue in among Hindus. The war between the Marathas and the Mughals was not one of Hindus or Muslims. Dara Shikoh became your good Muslim, Aurangzeb became your bad Muslim. There was no historical record of him asking Sambhaji to convert. Why do they show a supposedly cruel emperor always knitting? Reduce these accepted historical figures and tell you that they were not as powerful or not as influential. And I think that is the biggest danger. The kind of presence you have of Bollywood at the opening of the Ram Mandir, I don't think you.
Hello and welcome to the Federal. You are watching Off the Beaten Track, a program in which we take an in-depth look at some issue. Now, we all know that very recently in the city of Nagpur, which has actually been known for fairly good social several decades, there were riots. People were agitated. They were actually wanting that Aurangzeb's grave should be dug up and everything, whatever is there, if there are any remains, should be thrown up. We also all know that the entire episode was triggered by one film, a film called Chhaava in Hindi, which has actually become quite a big hit. It was first released in the theaters in February, and now it is there on the OTT on platforms. Now, Indian cinema has traditionally, especially after 1947, always been categorized as some kind of intellectual films for which there was a niche audience. And then there was the mass popular cinema, which was actually for the masses. In the initial years in the 1950s, there were very few films. If you just talk about Hindi cinema, there would be a Kagaz Ke Phool, there would be a Pyasa, there would be films which were actually on the borderline, Mother India, it just kind of there. But at some point in the 70s, it became a big movement. We used to call it the New Wave movement, started by Bhuvan Shom of Mrinal Sen, thereafter Satyajit Ray, Ritik Ghatak, the three Bengal maestros, and several other films. Shyam Benegal, who recently passed away, he was a trailblazer as far as Hindi cinema was concerned. M.S. Satyu, with the finest ever possibly film made on partition, Garam Hawa, etc., etc. But now, for the last few years, especially after 2014, we have a new genre of cinema, which is actually trying to secure support for the ideology of hyper-communalism and hyper-nationalism. Now, these films are also entertaining the people, but in the process, they are also serving the political agenda of today's political regime, which is ruling India at the center and in several states. Now, some media writers have given this the Hindutva film. Some people have given different kind of name tags, but by and large, these films have represent a certain trend. There are, of course, issues. Films have always, fulfilled the political ideology or kind of reflected the ideology of various governments. Can be argued that the Gandhian outlook or the Nehruvian outlook was reflected in previous films. But possibly the first time what we are seeing is that cinema being used to create hate or anger towards somebody who is officially a historical character, but actually film is not much about history so much as about trying to create a perception. So these are fairly complicated issue, and when I thought that we must try to somehow discuss, who do I think of? No one else but Kaveree Bamzai, who is a very renowned journalist and has written on cinema, but not just only on cinema, on society, on a large number of issues. Her attention span, goes across various sectors. So Kaveree Bamzai is joining us today. Thank you, Kaveree, for agreeing to do this program with us and actually trying to explain something which is very important, need to be understood, because this is where actually the messaging goes, from cinema to the people. We need to understand what messaging is going on.
Absolutely. Nilanjan, so well put. In a short span, you sort of, plotted the history of modern Indian cinema and also where we are currently.
Right.
And I think where we are currently is very disturbing. I'll tell you why. Two or three reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of the historical facts, what is being done now is that Aurangzeb or a certain kind of Muslim is
Mm.
being is a proxy for the Indian Muslim. So
Okay.
uh, the space that was originally taken up by the Pakistani jihadi
Mm.
has been converted into this space where Aurangzeb is the main villain.
Mm.
So through that, what you're doing is actually demonizing the Indian Muslim. You cannot
Right.
demonize him directly. Even now, there is certain propriety that is maintained, unless, of course, you're a Rohit Shetty and you don't maintain any propriety
Mm.
altogether. But more or less, what has happened is that the Pakistani terrorist, in a way,
Mm.
has been replaced by this proxy of Aurangzeb. And Aurangzeb stands in for the Indian Muslim. Very clear that Aurangzeb equals Aurangzeb's children, what were earlier
Right.
called Baba's children, and those are the Indian Muslims. That to me is the most worrying thing, because here you're actually, it's not even dog whistling. It's the message is loud and clear that you're not Indian, you are of foreign origin. Two, you are a villain, a clear villain. And in Chhaava, and I don't think this is substantiated by any fact whatsoever, even if there was torture, which Aurangzeb inflicted on Sambhaji, there was
Mm.
no historical record of him asking Sambhaji to convert. And
Mm.
this is very significant. The last 20 to 25 minutes of the film, and I mean, I cannot tell you how profoundly disturbing those 25 minutes are. I've not seen that kind of torture inflicted on anyone on screen for a long, long time. It is clearly a Muslim inflicting that torture on a Hindu. So there is no,
That is the
there is
message,
no, that
that
is the
it's a
message.
Muslim. Yeah.
Yes, because you have Aurangzeb, who is for some strange reason called Aurang in the movie and not Aurangzeb, actually asking Sambhaji, telling him, if you convert, we will stop this torture. And the
Mm.
torture is unimaginable, Nilanjan. It is gouging out of eyes, pulling out of, and this is no spoiler. It is, you have to really watch it through,
Yes.
you have to cover your eyes and watch it. So, this point of conversion, this is not even dog whistling, it's straight loudspeaker alert that this is what the Indian Muslim wants you to do. He wants
Yeah.
you to convert. And I think that is so disturbing.
Yeah, I will just come in, and add a bit to this conversation. You referred to Babar ke aulad becoming
Yeah,
Aurangzeb ke aulad. Now, let me just put
exactly.
it in context, for the benefit of our viewers. Babar ke aulad came up essentially through the movement which wanted to demolish the Babri Masjid and
Babri
build a Ram
Masjid.
temple in that
Right.
place. So it is Babar ke aulad. Now, that purpose is solved. So now,
Exactly.
who are the other characters from
Yeah,
history which we want to project as whose aulads are left now? So
right.
Aurangzeb is the next villainous character.
Yes. Yes.
Now let us try to understand
and
a bit
and
more.
just one thing here, Nilanjan, sorry to
Yeah.
intervene. This is
No,
very
no.
important because you've had a history of Indian filmmakers making movies like Mughal Azam, Jodha Akbar. So you had a certain kind of representation of the Mughal Empire. When you start watching Mughal Azam, the first thing they do is to show you a map of India and how actually the Mughal Empire, in a way, united India. When you
Hmm.
watch Jodha Akbar, you see the huge outreach, if you want to call it, of
Right.
Akbar to the Hindus and to other faiths as well. And the
Right.
idea that the Mughal Empire was not just about Muslims, but it was also hugely populated by Hindus who were generals, who were allies through marriage as well as through war and peace. So
Mm.
even in a movie like Padmavat, which in a way demonizes Muslims again, but this is prior to the Mughal Empire, Khilji,
Mm.
uh,
Chili's.
you again have that idea that there are certain alliances that are being forged. This idea is completely sort of torn apart in this kind of cinema. And despite the fact that it is very clear that the war between the Marathas and the Mughals was not one of Hindus or Muslims, because each had enough Muslim soldiers. Aurangzeb had enough Hindu generals,
Aurangzeb
right?
had so many, very important generals,
Important,
people who were
important Hindu
controlling.
generals, right? The
Yes,
whole,
yes,
I mean,
were Hindus.
I think if anyone who studied even a little bit of history knows that. So here,
Mm.
what was a turf war is actually in modern India being portrayed as a religious war, a war of
Mm.
conversion. And I think that is very important. That shift from Babur, because as you said, there is no purpose now to calling them Babur ki aulad, because what can you
Right.
do? I mean, that huge symbol has been destroyed, and you have another construct in place. So, what do you do? How do you demonize them? This is the obvious thing. You cannot use Akbar, you cannot use Shah Jahan, so you have to use Aurangzeb, who anyway in popular history is known as the man who imposed
And
jizya.
always prop up Dara Shikoh as the ideal Muslim and accusation against the adversaries of the
Exactly,
BJP. Why don't you
exactly.
prop up Dara Shikoh?
Yeah.
Why do
Now,
you argue? Why do you have a
now,
road named after Aurangzeb? That was the
exactly.
first warning bell went after 2014 when
Yeah.
that road in Delhi got
Because
closed.
again, Nilanjan, it was an idea of the good Muslim and the bad Muslim. So Dara Shikoh became your good Muslim, Aurangzeb became your bad Muslim. In 2013, there was a movie called Aurangzeb, which had nothing to do with Aurangzeb or history. It was a story of a mafia clan and a police family and the war between
Right.
them. But the tagline was, where kingship does not seek kinship. So Aurangzeb was the idea of Aurangzeb also killing all his brothers to achieve kingdom. That, yeah,
Imprisoning his father.
exactly. So that was again something that was not so subtly portrayed. So this is something that has actually been going on even in non-historical films in the last 10 years, which I find very fascinating. And this whole idea of division of the good Muslim and the bad Muslim, of course, is also something that has been going on.
Right.
You see it in movies such as Mulk as well, or say Mission Kashmir, where you have the good, upstanding Muslim officer who's taking on the jihadi in Kashmir. So this idea has been going on, but the idea that Aurangzeb is a stand-in for the Indian Muslim is, I think, a new low, even for Hindi cinema.
Right. It's a new low, well put. There have been other films where Aurangzeb has featured, besides the
Yeah.
ones which you named.
Yes.
Most importantly, and very recently, there was a film called Tanaji, where
Tanaji.
again the character of there. Now we have three Aurangzebs. One is the Aurangzeb who comes out from the history books,
Yeah.
and that entire episode which people are talking about, some historians have pointed out that in fact, if the Marathas were betrayed, if Sambhaji was betrayed, he was actually betrayed by a clan of Brahmins. That is how the
Exactly.
betrayal happened. Not from Anyway, there is a major controversy over that. The other is the film Chhaava, and then the Aurangzeb of Tanaji. Now, between these two films, how do you find that their portrayal or depiction of Aurangzeb?
Again, this is something that I noticed in both the films. If you notice, Aurangzeb is portrayed as someone who's forever knitting, you know. And
Yes.
this was something that was known about him, that he used to knit and embroider and mend his old clothes.
Hmm.
We read it again in popular history. I find this quite fascinating. Why do they show a supposedly cruel emperor always
Hmm.
knitting? And I think that is at the heart of this whole idea of masculinity. When you see
Hmm.
something like Padmavat,
Hmm.
Khilji is the epitome of brutish masculinity. He eats
Hmm.
meat like a beast. He looks like a beast. He's broad, ferocious. Here is Aurangzeb, supposedly the most villainous Mughal emperor of all, forever knitting. So the idea that the Muslim was equated to masculine
Hmm.
gets shattered. In Padmavat, you see the Rajput hero, the Rajput prince, slim, almost, I wouldn't say feminine, but quite clearly less masculine than Khilji. And I
Right.
think that is a very significant similarity between Tanhaji and Chhaava. Although Tanhaji is interesting because it shows a Hindu general of Aurangzeb being
Right.
almost as brutal as you expect a Muslim general to be, right?
Hmm.
But
Hmm. As his job
this
demands,
idea,
possibly,
yes,
if you
but
can
this
actually say.
idea of the Muslim masculinity, the Muslim
Hmm.
manhood, which I think has always been a very, very troubling and deeply, deeply troubling issue in among Hindus. This whole idea of love jihad, where does that arise from? There is this scare,
Hmm.
this fear of the Muslim man. And I think that taps into it. So while you're demonizing Aurangzeb, you're also
You're also
suggesting
showing him that he's not masculine enough.
he's not masculine enough. Don't you find that so fascinating?
No, I definitely find it very interesting, and that you're pointing out. It indicates that the filmmaker is trying to convey the idea that there was something completely imperfect about Aurangzeb's persona.
Exactly.
That he was violent, he was a brute person, but essentially, at core, he was not man enough. And all
Not
that he was.
manly enough, right?
Yeah, yeah, he was actually, just somehow or the other, trying to cover up, for
Yeah.
the inner core, which was actually, very feminine, if one can
Yeah.
actually say, it
I,
immediately
I find that,
associate knitting
yeah,
with women. So
I
that
find
is
that
something.
the most fascinating thing.
Yes, you're talking about distortion of history. Mughal Azam came up. You referred to Mughal Azam. Now, Mughal Azam, it's quite well known. Historians point out that there was actually no historical
No,
character
anarch.
called
Yeah, right.
to do that. But it's more popular than actual history. People
Yeah.
believe that story, again and again. From that time onwards, now, would you say that the depiction of historical characters is more for a political purpose than just for entertainment?
Oh, for sure. I think for sure. There's no doubt about it. You saw the recent movies like Accidental Prime Minister or Savarkar. I mean, all these are done
The
with a clear
Savarkar, that
purpose.
film.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the film with Randeep Hooda. These are all clearly done to either pull down recent or older historical figures, or to prop up figures who are not part of our popular history and who have this perception of not being heroes, so to speak. So of course, when you speak to the establishment, they'll tell you that this is all part of creating a new pantheon of freedom fighters who were not recognized and who were sort of subsumed under the huge shadow of the Gandhis and Nehrus. But it's all very, very cleverly done. And I think you will find going forward a whole host of other movies as well, which are actually focusing on the so-called unsung heroes, the unknown, heroes of the freedom movement, and this is all with an agenda, and the agenda is to tell us that there was not just one or two or three people who gave us our freedom, who fought for our freedom, but a lot of them. And
Right.
while that is perfectly acceptable, I mean, I don't doubt, I don't have an issue with that. What it does is actually then tell you, then sort of, reduce these accepted historical figures and tell you that they were not as powerful or not as influential. And I think that
Mhm.
is the biggest danger, that you don't have to promote one lot and reduce the other lot, but that is what is being done. And I think that going forward you will hear so many more of these
Right.
stories coming to light, either on streaming or in movies.
You know, there's something, while preparing for this particular discussion, I was reading up, because so much is happening, it kind of tends to go out of mind, after a few times, because there's been so too much of same thing happening again and again. Now there was that film called Kerala Story, which
Yeah,
actually tried to take on from the Kashmir Files, the
Kashmir
same
Files.
thing. Now there was actually a poster, which caught my eye, because the slogan of that Kerala Story uh, was the truth that was kept hidden.
Yeah,
So we are bringing you the truth which is actually being kept hidden by who?
yeah,
Obviously, the previous regime.
obviously, exactly.
This slogan, which is there on the posters of the Kerala Story, virtually repeats what has been said by the leaders of the BJP and
Yeah,
its allies, which are the pro-Hindutva allies, over the last decade or decade and a half. That we will come and bring you the truth of what has not been allowed to come out, and that the media is also very much part of this, keeping the truth out. The media has been accused of not allowing the truth from Kashmir coming out. We also had the Sabarmati report, the film which came out, which the media was directly accused of not bringing out the truth about the Godhra, carnage, the attack on the Sabarmati Express, which led to the Gujarat riots of 2002. So this synergy between cinema and politics. Now I will play the devil's advocate. Said that there has always been a connection between the film industry and the political class. That I refer to Gandhi and Nehruvian ideology being pushed forward. I remember, in the 80s, when we were just about coming into journalism, that time there was a big rediscovery of several films, including Gurudat, by the intelligentsia would discuss. And Pyasa and Kagaz Ke Phool were talked about as rebel films, which were actually articulating the beginning of the
disillusionment, so to speak.
failure of the
Yeah,
Nehruvian dream.
Nehruvian.
That is what being said. So then the argument is that what is the harm now if it was done in the past, that you had a cinema which was playing up the politics of the ruling party? Then how is it? Does it make a difference between now what is happening now? Would you say that the difference is, I'll just give you an auto prompt. Would you say that the difference is that the previous films ended at this point, drawing some kind of a parallel or highlighting? These films are doing what Chhaava does, is to arouse anger against some people of contemporary India.
Absolutely. I think these films are nothing but hate speech. I mean, hate
Okay.
speech for 2 hours, 3 hours. It is as simple as that. When you talked about movies like Pyasa and Kagaz Ke Phool, they were at a time when the so-called Nehruvian philosophy was the reigning philosophy. And you had another kind of idea being propagated as well. And it's not that you've not had other ideas being propagated,
Yes,
and
sir.
they were celebrated also. And it didn't matter that they were anti Nehru or anti Mrs. Gandhi. Okay, people will tell us that Kissa Kursika was never released or Andhi was banned. But these films were made, they were watched, people loved
Right.
them. Kissa Kursika, of course, I think only Sanjay Gandhi saw it. I don't think anyone else saw it, if he saw it at all. But
And
the
Adi,
idea
after it was finally released, a
that,
large number of people watched it, and I do
yeah,
not think that in today's India, any film which is even remotely similar to Adi will ever
remotely
be made.
similar to Andy can be made. Can you imagine a movie like that being made?
It
But
can't
what a
be.
political film, right? So these films existed despite the fact that the reigning establishment didn't quite like them. Here
Mhm.
you have the film industry doing exactly what this establishment wants it to do. And this is not now. This is when the prime minister went to Bombay and told the film industry titans, you have to make movies that are part of the nation building exercise. It was a call essentially to everybody to come together and to promote a certain kind of ideology. And that's exactly what is being done. The kind of presence you have of Bollywood at functions such as the opening of the Ram Mandir. I don't think you
Mm.
had this kind of representation and the appropriation of Bollywood as you had. I mean, it didn't exist earlier. I mean, of course, again, people will say that Devanand was Kishore Kumar was asked to perform for the Congress and didn't, and then he was banned from AIR. Devanand didn't agree with Mrs. Gandhi. He had a different ideology. He was never in favor. But these people existed. They still were celebrated. Here you have a complete appropriation. And this is not the VC Shukla candy kind of appropriation. This is a very different kind of political appropriation, that everything you do, whether it's a fitness campaign, whether it's asking people to vote, okay, all good things, or whether it's Swachh Bharat, or whether it's the inauguration of the Ram Mandir, Bollywood and also Tollywood increasingly will have to be part of it. And I think that appropriation is reflected in its cinema. And that's the huge difference that you find, that these are all
Right.
made with the intent of pleasing the establishment, with the intent of currying favor with the establishment. These are not made with the intent of making good cinema. And I think the fact that most of them have not done well at the box office except
Right.
Chhaava and Tanaji, which I think in terms of scale and in terms of spectacle are so enormous that people have gone to also watch it just for the spectacle of it. So I think that is the huge difference. When you see movies like Sabarmati Report, they haven't actually done well. Or Emergency, which is supposed to
Right.
be the most anti Mrs. Gandhi film, but turns out to be completely confused. You don't know whether it's supporting her or,
Exactly. Yes.
antagonizing her. So I think that is the huge difference.
You know, cinema, of course, we all know that there is a fiction film and there are documentaries. But would you agree, if I say, that in the recent years, several filmmakers have tried to come out with a new kind of a genre of films, which can be said quasi documentaries. Say, for instance, Kashmir Files, or the Kerala stories to which I refer to, Sabarmati Report. There was also something, I think Godra Report or Godra Story, something like that, film which came out in 2023. Another film. It was Accident or Conspiracy Godra, that was made in 2024. And you also have this film called uh, Buster, the Naxal story, and then these several biopics. मैं अटल हूँ, on Savarkar, there was the film Swatantra Veer Savarkar. Though despite the fact that this talks completely paints a different picture of Savarkar. In fact, even very recently, Arun Shori came out with a book which actually just focuses completely on that how the story or the image of Savarkar, which has been projected, is completely built on nothing but falsehood from the beginning till the end. Even the dramatic escape from the steamboat ship when he was arrested and being brought to India. He actually, Savarkar, did not swim through stormy sea for several hours. It was just possibly just swam through 10 or 12 feet and then was running for maybe about 50 or 100 meters before the French policemen caught him and returned back to British custody. So there are these things, but talking about the genre, has it become a fairly popular and giving the BJP's version of what has really happened?
Oh, for sure. Look at the new film that Vivek Agnihotri is working on, the Delhi Files, which are essentially about the direct action day in Calcutta and the terrible violence that happened there. That is going to be another thing that will again be discussed at great length and will again sow more hatred. There's a series of such films being planned over the next two or 3 years. That's what worries me, that it's not just a one-off. And when you were talking about this, I suddenly thought of Hey Ram, which
That's
Kamal
right.
Hassan made. Now,
Yes.
that also talked about the violence of the direct action day, and it talks about this man who, in a way, is standing for Godse, who wants to kill Gandhi, but he changes his mind at the last minute. And that transformation that Kamal Hassan's movie shows, while also showing the facts of direct action day, tells you of a far deeper understanding of the Indian mind and of Indian history. So it doesn't demonize one community or the other. It tells you things that happened. Of course, there was violence during partition on both sides of India, East and West. Both Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs killed each other. When you see
That's right.
Earth, 1947, by Deepa Mehta, again you find that, you had Hindus and Muslims both losing their lives. But again, it was seen as something that happened, and it was, I wouldn't say it was a balanced view of history, it was a more nuanced view of events that happened. And it never tried to demonize one or the other. It told you, okay, this happened with Muslims, this happened with Hindus, but everyone suffered. Now, when you talk about suffering, you can't start measuring who suffered more, who suffered less. And I think that is the issue now, that whenever we talk about an event like the Kashmir files, the exodus of Hindus from Kashmir in 1990, or whether you talk about direct action day, or you talk about partition, you're only allowed to see one view. And I think that is that nuance that has been lost, and that we as Indians are so proud of. The fact that we can take a nuanced view of things that
Hmm.
happen around us, that is lost. And that to me is the greatest thing that cinema was capable of. And cinema did for us. We used to laugh at those. You had the first, you had the Hindi script, then you had the English script, then you had the Urdu script. But these were things that we grew up with. We grew up with all three
Right.
languages, the titles being read in all three languages. We grew up with a certain kind of representation of Muslims. Okay, maybe in Amar Akbar Anthony, it was stereotyped. You had a Muslim tailor and who would sing the Qawwali, etc. But it was all done in a very nice, jolly fashion where everybody higgledy-piggledy lived together, in a nice jumble. That is
Hmm.
lost.
You
And
know,
that's so sad.
yeah, it's very extremely, sad. One last question. If you actually go back, there was political messaging happening. They
Yeah.
were there. We have accepted. Yet there was also a lot of other social messages being
Yeah.
sent out, even within the framework of the extremely popular Naach Gana Hindi cinema, which went on to other languages, every language in India, when learned from what the Hindi cinema was doing. There was a very strong class conflict being
Oh,
shown in
yes.
cinema, rich
Yeah.
versus poor.
Rich,
A
I
very
mean,
popular
all
film,
of
a poor
Amitabh
hero,
Bachchan is
poor,
class
poor
war.
hero, rich girl, and the
Yeah.
class divide making that and happening. So, along with the kind of propaganda films which are happening now, do you see the existence of what I'm saying, the social messaging? Is there any remnants of it? If not, then are there any hopes for it? Do you, as a person who has actually tracked cinema over several decades, is this possibly your time when you are actually feel hopeless quite at certain times?
That's what I watch Marathi cinema and Malayalam cinema. And I
Okay.
feel much, much better. You have so much more of class, of gender, issues that worry us much more, poverty, issues that worry us much more than, what religion you are. So when I want to watch nuance, I watch Marathi movies, I watch Malayalam movies, and I know that the kind of cinema which had that famous scene in Amar Akbar Anthony where a Hindu is donating blood to a Muslim is donating blood to a Christian
Very
in a most
melodramatic, but yet,
in a most
yet
unscientific and melodramatic way, but telling you something about the idea of India where everyone is one at the end of the day. I think that era of Hindi cinema is lost, and I think when people talk about Hindi cinema losing its mojo and not doing so well, I think it's forgotten to be true to storytelling, and I think that storytelling is still very much alive in some Tamil cinema,
some
which
regional, some
is,
regional films and
exactly Tamil
regional language
cinema,
films.
Malayalam cinema, Marathi cinema. So when I want to watch good cinema, I go there.
Well, yes, very well put that the Hindi cinema, which unfortunately still remains the major part of the industry, but it has lost its mojo. And more people, in fact, what you said, that I turn to other languages because these
Yeah,
days, with a little bit of technology, you can actually get dubbed cinema very fast.
yeah,
Even if it is
yeah,
not original dubbed, you can actually manage to do it and watch these films. Access is easily available, so I can say that our viewers, if they want to watch good films, maybe turn to the other languages and see
yeah.
what is running there, both in theaters as well as on OTT
Yes, and
platforms.
a different kind
And
of politics, Nilanjan, that there doesn't need to be only one kind of politics. There's
that's right.
social politics, there's gender politics, there's so many other kinds of politics apart from the Hindu Muslim politics.
Yes,
Let's step out of that.
as they say about India, that there is an issue at every turning. So
Oh,
there
yeah.
are issues at every point, and I hope that the filmmakers do that, and we do not get inflicted with the chavas
Oh,
for
yes.
many years. Somehow or the other, there is a corrective measure. Thank you very much, Kaveri, for
Thank
joining
you
me
so
on this
much.
program. It's
Thank
been a
you.
real pleasure speaking with you.